The blood came before she even saw the wolf. Seraphine noticed it the moment her boot touched the wet grass near the river's edge, a dark, thick trail cutting through the frost, moving from the tree line toward the water. It was too much blood for a deer. Too deliberate for an accident. She had been collecting herbs along the Ashfen River since she was 12 years old, and in all that time, the forest had never shown her a trail like this one. She should have turned around. She was 22 years old, an omega, and an albino, 3 facts that, in the eyes of Crest Hollow Pack, made her someone who was supposed to keep her head down and do exactly what she was told. Her white hair and pale pink eyes had never been seen as anything but a bad omen, something the elders whispered about when they thought she was not listening. She had grown up learning that her safest choice was always the quiet one, but the trail was still moving, meaning whatever made it was still alive. She followed it. The wolf was enormous. It was lying on its side in the shallow curve of the riverbank, half hidden by the roots of a fallen alder tree. Its fur was black, the deepest black she had ever seen, like ink poured into animal form, and its left front leg was caught inside a steel trap that had been set illegally along the water's edge. The trap's teeth had gone deep, the leg was twisted badly beneath it, and there was a crossbow bolt buried into the muscle just below the wolf's right shoulder, the shaft still quivering faintly from the animal's ragged breathing. The wolf's eyes were open. They were gold, sharp and aware, even through the pain. Seraphine stopped walking. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was not a small wolf. This was not an injured, harmless creature. The size alone told her this was an alpha, a dominant wolf, a powerful one, and those were the most dangerous kind even when they were perfectly healthy. A wounded alpha was something entirely different, something she had been warned about her entire life. The wolf looked at her. She looked at the wolf. Neither of them moved. Then the wolf made a sound, low, broken, barely audible over the river current, and something in Seraphine's chest cracked open like ice splitting in early spring. It was not a threatening sound. It was a sound of pure, exhausted suffering, and she had spent enough years tending to wounded animals and sick pack members to know the difference between danger and desperation. She set her herb basket down on the grass and crouched low, dropping to the wolf's level so that her profile would read as small and non-threatening as possible. She kept her eyes soft, looking slightly to the side rather than directly into those gold eyes, because she knew enough about wolf behavior to understand that a direct stare was a challenge, and a challenge right now could get her killed. "I am not going to hurt you," she said quietly. "I just want to look at the trap." The wolf did not move. It watched her with those sharp golden eyes, and she could see the incredible effort it was taking for the animal to stay still, to not snap at her, to not react on pure predatory instinct. It was making a choice, she realized. In the middle of all that pain, it was making a conscious choice to let her approach. She moved slowly, every motion deliberate, every breath steady. Up close, the trap was worse than she had seen from a distance. The teeth had clamped through muscle, and the wolf's attempts to free itself, the torn grass and broken root marks surrounding the trap, told her it had been struggling for some time before exhaustion finally made it stop. She reached into her herb basket and found the short iron wedge she always carried for prying apart roots when she harvested. It was not made for this. It would have to be enough. "This is going to hurt," she told the wolf. "I am sorry." She worked the wedge between the trap's teeth, pressing down with all the weight she could manage, and the trap released with a sound like a gunshot, cracking the cold morning air. The wolf jerked hard, a convulsive flinch of pain, and Seraphine rocked back on her heels but did not run. She waited. She gave the animal the seconds it needed. Then she turned to the bolt. She had pulled bolts before. From dogs, from deer that pack hunters brought back when they misjudged a shot. She knew how it was done, and she knew what the risk was. A bolt pulled wrong could tear more than it removed. She examined the angle, pressed the surrounding tissue with careful fingers to understand how deep it had traveled, and then she worked fast and clean. The wolf made no sound when she pulled it free, only went rigid for a terrible moment before the tension released. She packed both wounds with yarrow and white pine resin from her basket, the yarrow to stop the bleeding, the resin to hold the wound edges together until the wolf's own healing could take over. She wrapped the leg in strips torn from the inner lining of her cloak, working methodically, talking the whole time in the same low, even voice she used when she tended to the pack's children, who were frightened of pain. She told the wolf about the river, about the way the water ran different colors in different seasons, gray in winter, green in spring, brown and warm in summer. She told it about the herbs she had collected that morning and what she used each one for. She talked because silence felt wrong, and because she had found, over years of tending to frightened creatures, that a calm voice was often the most useful medicine of all. By the time she finished, the morning light had shifted to midday pale. Her cloak lining was ruined. Her hands were stained dark red. Her knees ached from crouching so long on cold ground. The wolf's breathing had steadied. The frantic, shallow rhythm had slowed into something deeper and more regular. The gold eyes, which had stayed fixed on her face the entire time she worked, had grown less sharp. Not frightened, but something closer to tired. The kind of tired that comes when a body finally decides it is safe enough to rest. Seraphine sat back on the grass and looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at her. "You should eat something when you wake up," she said, as though the wolf could follow instructions, "and stay away from this part of the river for a while. Whoever set that trap will come back to check it." She began gathering her things. The trap she dismantled with the wedge and a flat stone, prying the mechanism apart until it could not be reset, then dropped its pieces into the deepest part of the current to be carried away. She could not report it. She had no authority in Crest Hollow to report anything. But she could make sure it would not catch another animal tonight. When she looked back, the wolf was watching her do this, just watching, with that same steady, unreadable golden gaze. Then it was gone. She did not see it leave. One moment it was there, dark and enormous against the pale, frost-covered roots of the fallen tree, and then the tree line had simply absorbed it, as though the forest had reached out and pulled it home. Seraphine stood alone by the river for a long moment. The water ran gray and cold beside her. Her ruined cloak flapped in the wind. She picked up her herb basket and walked home. She told no one what she had found, not because she was ashamed of it, but because she understood, with the clear-eyed practicality that had always been her way of surviving in Crest Hollow, that the story would not be received the way it happened. They would not hear that she had helped a suffering animal. They would hear that an Omega, who was already considered strange and unlucky, had gone wandering alone by the river and approached a dominant alpha wolf in a vulnerable state. There was no version of that story that ended well for her. So she washed the blood from her hands at the cottage pump, hung her ruined cloak to dry, and made herself a pot of chamomile tea. She sat by the window and listened to the evening sounds of the pack settling in for the night, and she tried not to think about a pair of gold eyes watching her in the cold morning light. She mostly failed at that last part. The next morning, she went back to the river. She told herself it was for more yarrow. The yarrow patch was there. She did collect some, but she also walked the length of the bank where she had found the wolf, checking the wound signs, the broken ground, the tracks. The wolf had moved east into the tree line, and from the depth and spacing of the prints, it had been moving steadily rather than stumbling. That was a good sign. That meant the bleeding had stayed controlled, and the animal's natural healing had begun to take over. She was aware that what she felt, standing there looking at those tracks, was relief. Not the kind of relief you felt when a stranger avoided getting hurt, the kind you felt when someone you cared about was going to be all right. She stood there for a long moment, holding her basket of yarrow, feeling the particular foolishness of a person who had developed feelings for a wolf she had spoken to for 4 hours in a cold October field. Then she went home and got on with her day. She did not know, as she walked back through the frost-pale grass of Crest Hollow's outskirts, that the choice she had made by that river that morning was already moving outward, like rings on water, in directions she could not yet see. She did not know that the decision to stay, the decision to set down her basket and crouch low and say, "I am not going to hurt you," had already changed the course of her life. She would find that out soon enough. In the meantime, she made dinner, tended to the pack elder's youngest daughter who had a chest cold, and went to sleep with the sound of the Ashfen River running somewhere in the back of her mind, constant and quiet, the way it always did. Outside, the forest was still. The trees held their cold and their dark and their secrets. And somewhere deep inside the tree line, moving east toward Ironmore territory, Something enormous and black was healing faster than it should have been possible, and carrying the faint, unmistakable scent of yarrow and white pine resin and a girl with silver hair like birch bark in the snow. The scouts arrived on a Wednesday. Seraphine was at the market stalls in the center of Crest Hollow when the Ironmore wolves came through the settlement gate, and she noticed them the way she noticed most things, quietly, from a distance, with more attention than she let show on her face. There were 3 of them. They wore no colors, no formal markings of Ironmore territory, which was itself a kind of signal. When powerful packs moved without markings, it meant they were not looking for a formal introduction. It meant they wanted to look around first. They spoke to Elder Bram for a long time. Seraphine watched from across the market while she sorted dried herbs into bundles and tried to read the conversation from body language alone. Elder Bram was a large man who carried himself with the particular dignity of someone who had been in charge long enough to forget what it felt like to be nervous. He was nervous now. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands stayed very still at his sides, the careful stillness of someone working hard not to show a reaction. The scouts left before midday. They did not buy anything. They did not stay for tea. They simply asked whatever they had come to ask, listened to whatever Bram told them, and walked back out through the gate, the same way they had come in. By evening, the story had moved through Crest Hollow like water moves through a cracked dam, fast and inevitable, and slightly out of control by the time anyone thought to contain it. Ironmore was searching for something. No one was saying what. Elder Bram had called it a routine inquiry into regional boundary matters, which everyone in Crest Hollow understood to mean that Bram had no idea what Ironmore actually wanted and was not about to admit it. Seraphine listened to the talk and said nothing. She noticed that no one in Crest Hollow connected the Ironmore scouts to her. Why would they? She was an Omega who lived at the edge of the settlement and collected herbs by the river. She was not the kind of person that events happened to. She was the kind of person events happened around, at a comfortable distance. She went to the river the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. The wounds she was checking for were gone. The bank had weathered back to ordinary riverbed, the torn grass growing in, the broken roots half buried under a new frost. There was no sign that anything had happened there. The river did not care about the things that occurred on its banks. It just kept moving. But on the 4th morning, she found the tracks again. Not the same tracks as before. These were smaller, lighter, a wolf that had been moving carefully, not injured, but deliberately slow. They circled the spot where the trap had been, came to the water's edge, and then turned back into the tree line, the same direction as before, east. Seraphine crouched over the tracks for a long time. They were fresh, maybe 12 hours old. She pressed her palm flat against the frozen mud next to one of the prints, and felt something move through her.
Decision her.
She could not name cleanly. It was not exactly fear. It was the feeling you got when you realized a situation was larger than you had initially understood it to be. She walked home and spent the day doing ordinary things with the focused energy of someone trying to keep their mind occupied. She reorganized her herb stores. She restitched the lining of the cloak she had ruined by the river, which she had told herself she would do for 3 weeks. She helped Mara, her neighbor, and the closest thing she had to a friend in Crest Hollow, carry supplies from the outer storage shed into the main kitchen store before the afternoon frost came in properly. Mara was 53 years old, wide-shouldered, gray-haired, and constitutionally incapable of pretending not to notice things. She had been watching Seraphine with the particular attention of someone who had a question they had not yet decided to ask. She decided to ask it while they were stacking root vegetables in the cold room. "You have been quiet this week," Mara said, not looking up from the turnips she was arranging. "I am always quiet," Seraphine said. "There is quiet, and then there is the kind of quiet where a person is carrying something." Mara set down a turnip and looked at her directly. "I have known you long enough to know the difference." Seraphine thought about the tracks that morning. The circle around the place where the trap had been. The east-facing return path. "Ironmore's scouts were here Wednesday," Seraphine said. "Yes," Mara said. "Everyone knows that. Do you know what they were looking for?" Mara was quiet for a moment. She had been in Crest Hollow longer than anyone currently living there. She knew things that the official pack history did not include, because she had been present for events that no one wanted properly documented. "There is a story," Mara said finally. that the Ironmore Alpha has been searching the region since early October, not publicly, quietly, the way a person looks for something they do not want anyone else to find first. Seraphine kept her face still. What kind of something? No one knows. That is the part that makes people nervous. Mara turned back to the root vegetables. Alpha King Salandrevith does not do things without reason. And when Ironmore moves this quietly, it is usually because the reason is personal. Salandrevith. She had heard the name before, the way everyone in the northern settlements had heard it, as a piece of regional geography, like a mountain range or a river system. Ironmore's Alpha King. Mid-30s, she had heard, though she did not know if that was accurate, came to power young, ran his territory with the kind of efficiency that made neighboring packs either deeply relieved or deeply nervous, depending on their relationship with Ironmore. She did not know his face. She had never had reason to. She thought, standing in the cold room surrounded by root vegetables, about a pair of gold eyes watching her in the morning light of an October field. She put the thought away, neatly, firmly, the way she put away things that were going to cause her trouble if she let herself look at them too long. The Ironmore scouts came back the following week. This time there were 5 of them, and they came at dusk, which was a different kind of signal entirely. Elder Bram met them at the gate again, and this time the conversation was shorter. Bram came back looking like a man who had received information he did not know what to do with. Seraphine watched this from the window of her cottage. She had been grinding dried elderflower when the scouts arrived, and she kept grinding, steady and even, because keeping her hands busy was how she managed the particular feeling that had been building in her chest since the morning she found the return tracks at the river. The feeling was not dread exactly. It was more like the feeling of standing at the top of a very long staircase and knowing, before you took a single step, that you were going to have to walk down. The full moon was 4 days away. She knew this because she always tracked the moon. It affected the river tides, which affected which herbs flowered and when, which affected her work. She had tracked the moon for years without thinking of it as anything more than a practical calendar. She was thinking of it differently now. She went to the river on the morning before the full moon and sat on the bank for an hour without collecting anything. The water ran gray and cold, the same as it always did in late autumn. The alder tree where the wolf had been lying was just a fallen tree again, its roots dark and bare against the frost. She thought about what Mara had told her, about a search that had begun in early October, moving quietly through the northern settlements, asking questions no one was being given answers to. October, early October, the same morning she had found a wolf caught in a steel trap by the Ashfen River. She sat with that thought for a long time. The river kept moving beside her, indifferent and steady, going where it was going, regardless of what happened on its banks. She walked home, she made dinner, she went to bed. The full moon rose, and the sky over Crest Hollow turned the particular silver white that made the frost-covered rooftops look like they had been hammered out of metal. Seraphine lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, and knew, with the same clear, practical certainty that had always been her way of understanding things, that she was not going to sleep tonight. She got up, put on her coat, the repaired one, the one she had re-stitched herself, put on her boots, opened her door. The night was cold and still and very bright under the full moon. She walked to the river. She was not going to find anything, she told herself. She was going for the walk. She was going because she could not sleep, and the night was clear, and the river path was the only place in Crest Hollow where she had ever felt entirely like herself. She was nearly to the water's edge when she saw the shape standing on the opposite bank. A wolf, a black, enormous, standing completely still, watching her from across the current, and even in the distance and the moonlight she knew those eyes, gold, sharp, aware in a way that was different from ordinary wolf awareness. A kind of intelligence behind them that she recognized because she had looked into them once before, in a cold field, while she worked with steady hands and spoke quietly to keep both of them calm. She stood on her side of the river. The wolf stood on its other side. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then the wolf stepped back, slowly, into the tree line, and was gone. Seraphine stood alone on the riverbank in the moonlight. The water ran between where she stood and where the wolf had been, cold and constant, and wide enough that she could not have crossed it without effort. She walked home. She went back to bed. She lay there in the silver-washed dark and thought about the distance between two banks of a river, and what it meant when something stood on the other side of it and simply looked. She slept. Eventually, she did not dream. She did not know that by the time she woke up the next morning, there would be a knock at her door that would change everything she understood about her own life. The knock came at midnight, not the next morning.
Midnight.
That night, Seraphine had slept for perhaps 3 hours when the sound pulled her out of a dreamless dark, and she sat up in her bed with her heart already moving fast, the way it did when a body understood something before the mind had time to catch up. She sat still for a moment, listening. The settlement was quiet outside. The full moon was still up, filling the window with silver light, and in that light, she could see every ordinary corner of her small cottage. The dried herb bundles hanging from the rafters, the clay pots on the shelf, the worn wooden table, the cold hearth, everything exactly as it always was. The knock came again. It was not loud. That was the first thing she noticed. It was 3 deliberate taps, evenly spaced, with a pause between each one that felt almost careful, like the person on the other side of the door was trying specifically not to startle her. She got up. She pulled her coat on over her sleeping clothes because the cottage was cold, and because she was not going to open her door in the middle of the night without something solid on her body. She crossed the floor in her bare feet, stopped with her hand on the door latch, and said, "Who is there?" Silence. Then, Seraphine Ashvale. Not a question, just her name, said in a voice she had never heard before, and somehow already knew was going to be significant. It was a low voice, controlled. The kind of voice that had learned at some point to be very deliberate about how much of itself it let out at one time. She opened the door. The man standing in her doorway was tall, considerably taller than she had registered as a possibility in the half-second before she pulled the door open. He had dark hair and dark clothing, plain riding clothes with no markings, and his left forearm was wrapped in a leather brace that covered something still healing underneath. She could see the edge of a scar above the brace's upper strap. She looked at his face. She looked at his eyes. They were gold. The specific gold of late morning light coming through amber glass. The specific gold of a gaze that was sharp and aware, and carrying something underneath it that she could not immediately name. She recognized him, not the way you recognized a face you had seen before. The way you recognized something you had always known was real, even before you had evidence of it. She had known those eyes in a cold field in October, low to the ground, in the body of a wolf that was choosing, in the middle of enormous pain, to let her close enough to help. She held the door with both hands and did not move. The man, because he was a man standing in her doorway, not a wolf, though she understood now exactly what the connection was, looked at her face, and she watched something move across his expression that he did not appear to have planned on showing her. It was not relief. Exactly. It was something more complicated than relief. It was the look of a person who has been searching for something and has finally, after a very long time, found it, and is now confronting the fact that finding it is going to require something of them that they had not fully prepared for. "It was you," he said. 2 words. The same voice she had heard through the door, but quieter now, like he was saying it as much to himself as to her. Seraphine did not answer immediately. She looked at the leather brace on his left forearm, the scar above it, edging up toward the elbow. She thought about the left front leg of the wolf she had found in the steel trap, the way the teeth had gone through the muscle, the way she had wrapped it in strips from the inner lining of her cloak. "You should come away from the doorway," she said finally. "It is cold, and standing in a lit doorway in the middle of the night will bring the neighbors out." He stepped back from the door without being asked twice. She pulled her coat tighter and stepped out into the moonlit cold, rather than inviting him inside, because she needed the open air and the distance of the outside world for this conversation. She pulled the door closed behind her. They stood facing each other on the frost-pale grass in front of her cottage. The full moon was overhead, bright enough to read by. "Your name," she said. Not a question. She already knew it. She wanted to hear him say it. "Kaelin Dreveth," he said. She had thought, somehow, that hearing it confirmed would feel like something settling. Instead, it felt like the first step of a very long descent. "Ironmore's Alpha King," she said. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. He did not fidget. He did not look away. He stood in the moonlight with the particular stillness of a man who had learned to wait, who understood that the person in front of him was processing something significant, and that the useful thing to do right now was simply not crowd her. "You were alone," she said, "when I found you. You were in wolf form, and you were alone, and no one came. I had been tracking poachers who were moving into Ironmore territory from the south. I left my guard behind because I thought it would be easier to track undetected in wolf form without a full unit around me." He paused. "My second-in-command has not forgiven me for that decision." "You were in a steel trap," Seraphine said, "with a crossbow bolt in your shoulder, alone, for long enough that the blood trail from where you were first hit had dried before I found it." "Yes. How long had you been there?" "Since before dawn. You found me around mid-morning." She absorbed this before dawn to mid-morning, alone, in a trap laced with a metal compound she now understood was designed to slow wolf healing. She had thought it was an ordinary steel trap, but the particular resistance she had noticed in the wound, when she pulled the bolt, now made more sense in a different context. "The trap slowed your healing," she said. "Yes. If you had stayed in it until evening, I would have been found by the poachers when they came to check their line, in that state, in wolf form, unable to shift." He said it flatly, the way you said things that were true, and that you had already spent significant time sitting with. It would not have ended well. Seraphine looked at the leather brace on his arm. "It is still healing. Slowly. The compound in the trap affects the healing process, even after removal. It will pass." He looked at her with those gold eyes. "Your yarrow and pine resin slowed the blood loss enough that I could move within an hour of when you left. Without that, I would not have been able to reach safe territory before the poachers returned." She thought about that hour herself walking home through the frost-pale grass, washing blood off her hands at the pump, making tea, trying not to think about gold eyes in a cold field. "You came back," she said, "to the river. I found your tracks." Something shifted in his expression. "I needed to know who you were. I knew the scent, but not the face, not the name. I have been asking through the settlements for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Ironmore scouts," Seraphine said slowly. "Asking questions no one was getting answers to. I asked them to be discreet. And yet here you are, at my door, at midnight. I found out your settlement 2 days ago. I came tonight because the full moon." He stopped. "Started again. There is something I need to tell you, and it is going to be difficult to hear, and I want to tell you as plainly as I know how, because I think you are the kind of person who would rather hear a difficult thing plainly than have it dressed up to be easier." Seraphine looked at him. She had been looking at him the whole time, but now she looked more carefully at the set of his jaw, which was controlled, at the tension around his eyes, which was the tension of a man doing something that required significant effort, at the way he held himself in the cold moonlight, like a person who was entirely prepared to be told no to whatever he was about to say, and who was going to say it anyway, because it was true. "Tell me plainly then," she said. He looked at her directly. "You are my fated mate." The words landed in the cold air between them, and sat there, precise and solid, and impossible to mishear. Seraphine was very still. The frost on the grass caught the moonlight. Somewhere across the settlement, a dog barked once and went quiet. "I have known since the moment you touched the wound," Seelan continued, and his voice was careful now, measured, the way a person was careful when they were saying something they understood might not be received well. "I could not see your face clearly, not in wolf form, not in that state, but I knew. The bond recognized you before I could even understand what was happening. It has been pulling me toward you since that morning." Seraphine thought of 3 weeks of a strange warmth in her chest that she had not been able to name. 3 weeks of returning to the river, for reasons she had told herself were practical. 3 weeks of lying awake in the silver-washed dark, not sleeping, not entirely understanding why. She thought about a wolf on the opposite bank of the river in the moonlight, just watching, not crossing, waiting. She closed her door. She closed it quietly, not with anger. She turned the latch and stood with her back against the wood, and the cold cottage air around her, and stared at the herbs hanging from the rafters, and focused on breathing steadily. She heard nothing from the other side of the door for a long moment, then footsteps, moving away, measured and unhurried. Not leaving. She could still feel, with the new and unwelcome awareness that had apparently been building in her for 3 weeks without her permission, that he was still within a short distance of the cottage. He had simply stepped back, away from the door, giving her space. Which made it worse, somehow. She would have found it easier if he had been demanding. She stood in her cottage for a long time. The hearth was cold. The moon moved slowly across the window. Then she opened the door again. Seelan was standing 10 feet away, turned slightly to the side, looking out at the frost-covered common ground of the settlement. He turned back when he heard the door, but he did not move toward her. She looked at him in the moonlight. He looked at her. "I have questions," she said. "I imagined you would," he said. "They are real questions, not easy ones. I would expect that." She looked at the brace on his arm, at the scar above it, at the particular careful way he held himself in the cold. Not stiff, but present, the way a person stood when they were paying close attention to something that mattered. "Not tonight," she said. "I need to think first." "I understand. You are still going to be here tomorrow?" "I will be here as long as it takes." She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she went back inside, closed the door again, and sat down at her wooden table in the cold moonlight and stared at her hands. The hands that had packed yarrow into a wolf's wounds on an October morning and started something she was only now beginning to understand the shape of. She did not sleep again that night, but this time, it was not because of dread. It was because she was a practical woman, and she had a list of questions to write. By morning, Crest Hollow knew. Not everything. Not the truth of it. Because the truth of it was a thing that Seraphine had not told anyone, and Seelan's presence outside the settlement gate told its own story without her help. 6 Ironmore wolves, camped in neat order, on the common ground outside the eastern boundary, with a fire and tents, and every indication that they intended to be there for longer than an afternoon visit. And at the center of it, Kalen Drevith, who Elder Bram, identified by mid-morning, and who did not introduce himself formally, or send a greeting, or do any of the expected political things that an Alpha King visiting a neighboring settlement would normally do. He simply made camp and waited. This, Seraphine understood, when Mara came to find her before she had finished her morning tea, was causing Elder Bram significant distress. "He has sent a formal request," Mara said, sitting down across from Seraphine at the wooden table, without being invited, because Mara never needed an invitation. She set a folded piece of paper on the table between them. "For courtship rights. For you." Seraphine looked at the paper. She did not pick it up. Elder Bram is not sure if he is more afraid that it is real, or more afraid that it is some kind of test, Mara continued. "Either way, he is very eager for you to explain what is happening." "I do not owe Elder Bram an explanation." Mara was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "You do not." She looked at Seraphine steadily. "Do you owe me one?" Seraphine looked at her oldest friend in Crest Hollow, who had brought her soup when she had a winter illness, and stood up to the Elder Council when they wanted to reduce Seraphine's territory access, and who was looking at her now with an expression that was carefully not pushing. "I found a wolf by the river in October," Seraphine said. "Hurt badly. I helped it." Mara's expression did not change. She waited. "It was him," Seraphine said. "In wolf form." Mara sat with this for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Ah, yes. And he is saying, you are fated mates. He is saying that. And you?" Seraphine looked down at her tea. "I am saying I have questions." Mara nodded, slowly, the way she nodded when she was thinking something through, rather than just agreeing. "What kind of questions?" "The kind you ask when someone tells you that your life is about to be different, in ways you did not choose and did not plan for." Seraphine wrapped both hands around her tea mug. "I am not sure I believe that a fated bond is something that happens without any say from the person involved. I am not sure I trust that the reason he is here is not partly because he feels he owes me something. I do not want to be someone's obligation dressed up as fate." Mara looked at her for a long moment. "Those are good questions," she said. "The real kind." "I know. Are you going to ask them?" "I am going to write them down first," Seraphine said, "and then yes." She spent the rest of the morning doing exactly that. She went about her work. The elder's daughter's chest cold had improved but not cleared. She had a poultice to check on an old man's knee injury. She had herbs to sort and dry. And in between all of it, she turned her questions over in her mind like stones, finding the real shape of each one, separating the questions that came from genuine uncertainty from the ones that came from fear. The pack's reaction to Kaylin's camp was everything she had expected it to be. Some people avoided looking in the direction of the eastern gate entirely, as though not looking at the situation might make it resolve itself without their involvement. Some were visibly thrilled at the idea of a connection to Ironmore, the way people got thrilled about things that reflected well on their community. Some were openly suspicious, and a few were something Seraphine found more difficult to navigate, suddenly and specifically kind to her in a way that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with who was camped outside the gate. She noticed all of this and kept walking. She had spent 22 years being invisible in Crest Hollow, and she was not going to start making decisions based on what Crest Hollow thought of her now. What she did not expect was Colin himself. She had built, in the 12 hours since she had closed her door on him, a reasonable expectation of what the next few days would look like. She expected pressure. She expected the kind of attention that was too large and too present, the kind that was meant to make someone feel that the decision was already made and they were simply catching up. She had been on the receiving end of that kind of attention from the pack her whole life. Not romantic attention, but the attention of people who had already decided what she was and were waiting for her to perform it. What Seelan did was something entirely different. He stayed outside the gate. He did not send requests for meetings. He did not position himself where she would have to walk past him. On the second day, when she went to the outer storage shed near the eastern boundary to retrieve supplies, she saw him at his camp, talking to one of his wolves, and he looked up, registered that she was there, and looked back at his conversation. He did not walk toward her. He did not call out. He simply acknowledged her existence with the kind of glance that said, "I see you are here, and I am not going to turn this into a thing you have to manage." She stood outside the storage shed for a moment, unexpectedly off balance. Then she got her supplies and went back inside. On the third day, a small package appeared at her door, not delivered by hand. She had not seen anyone leave it, which meant whoever had placed it had done so early, before she was up. Inside was a cloth pouch of star thistle, the specific variety that did not grow in this part of the region and that she had been unable to source for 2 seasons running. It was the primary ingredient in the chest remedy she had been improvising around for Elder Bram's youngest grandchildren all winter. No note, no name. The pouch itself was plain, undyed linen. She stood in her doorway holding the star thistle and felt something move through her that was inconveniently close to warmth. On the 4th day, she ran into him by accident. She had gone to the settlement's outer boundary to check the frost line on a wild herb patch that grew near the stone wall, and he was standing 20 feet away on the other side of the gate with his back to her, talking to one of his wolves. They both heard her at the same time. She heard him before she rounded the corner of the wall, and she could tell from the half-second stillness in his posture when she appeared that he heard her too. He finished what he was saying to the other wolf, who walked away, and then he turned. "Seraphine," he said. Just her name. Exactly the way he had said it through her closed door that first night. No performance in it. "Keelan," she said. A pause. Neither of them moved toward or away from the other. The gate was between them, literally open, because the gate was only closed at night, but neither of them crossed it. "The star thistle," she said. "A healer 3 valleys east was moving their stores for winter. I heard about it." "How did you know I needed it specifically?" "You had been improvising around it in your remedies. Mara mentioned it to one of my wolves when she came out to tell us we were making Elder Bram Grey before his time." Seraphine looked at him. "Mara talked to your wolves?" "Mara is extremely efficient," Kylan said, with the very slight tone of a man who had not quite expected that particular development either. Something pulled at the corner of Seraphine's mouth that she kept there, not letting it become a full expression. "What else did Mara tell your wolves?" "That I have 10 days before Bram officially asks me to either declare my purpose or move on, because the uncertainty is bad for the settlement's general anxiety levels." He paused. "And that you are someone who makes better decisions when people give you room to make them." She was quiet for a moment. "Mara is correct about the second thing." "I know," he said simply. She looked at him in the clear, cold afternoon light. He looked back at her, and she had the same feeling she had had that first night, of a person working very carefully not to be too much, because they understood that too much was the thing that would push her away. "I have my questions," she said. Something changed in his expression. Not surprise, more like the quiet acknowledgement of a thing that had been waited for. "I know. I would like to ask them properly, not through a gate." He was still for a moment, then he said, "Wherever you would like, whenever you would like." She thought about the river. She thought about the ashfen bank and the alder tree and the morning light that came down silver and gray through the trees in late autumn. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "the river. I know the path better than you do, so come to the eastern gate at sunrise, and I will meet you there." "I will be there," he said. She nodded and walked back toward the settlement. She did not look back, but she was aware, with the particular new awareness that had been operating in her for weeks, of the exact moment when he turned away from the gate and walked back toward his camp. Mara was waiting in Seraphine's cottage when she returned. She was sitting at the table with 2 cups of tea and an expression of tremendous self-satisfaction. "You talked to his wolves," Seraphine said. "They were right there," Mara said. "It would have been rude not to." Seraphine sat down across from her and picked up the tea. It was still hot. Mara had timed it perfectly, which meant she had been watching from a window. "He remembered the star thistle," Seraphine said. "Yes," Mara said. "He tracked down a supplier 3 valleys away because I had been improvising around one ingredient." "Yes. That is," she stopped. "The kind of thing a person does," Mara said, "when they are paying attention." Seraphine held the warm cup in both hands and looked at the table. Outside, the sun was going down, painting the frost on the grass a pale orange gold. From the eastern side of the settlement, she could see the glow of the Ironmore camp's fire through the window. "I am going to ask him the real questions tomorrow," she said. "Good," Mara said. "And I am going to listen to the actual answers, not the answers I have decided to expect." "Even better," Mara said. Seraphine drank her tea and let the warmth of it move through her chest, and tried not to think about how long it had been since she had made a decision that was fully, entirely her own. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow she would find out what kind of man stood behind those gold eyes, and then she would decide. The river looked different in the early morning light. Seraphine had walked this bank hundreds of times, in every season and in every kind of weather, and she thought she knew every angle of it, but she had never walked it with another person beside her, and she noticed now how the presence of someone else changed the quality of the quiet, made it a different kind of silence, one that had shape and texture, and that she found, to her careful surprise, she was not uncomfortable in. Kothian walked beside her without talking. He had met her at the eastern gate exactly at sunrise, as he said he would, wearing the same plain riding clothes, the leather brace on his left arm, and a look that was focused and unhurried. She had not offered him tea. He had not asked for any. They had simply started walking. The frost was heavy this morning. It coated the grass and the branches and the exposed roots along the bank in a fine white layer that caught the early light and turned it silver. Their footsteps were the loudest thing for the first 5 minutes, and then the river came within earshot and they were not the loudest thing anymore. She stopped when they reached the spot she was heading for. Not the place where the trap had been, but further upstream, where the bank widened into a flat shelf of rock that caught the morning sun. She sat down on the rock. He sat beside her, a careful distance away, and looked at the water. She had her list in her coat pocket. She had written it over 3 days and edited it down to the questions that were real, the ones that came from genuine need to understand, rather than from the fear she was trying not to let run the conversation. She pulled it out and smoothed it against her knee. "Question 1, she said. He looked at her. She looked at the paper. The bond. The fated mate connection. I understand the concept. What I want to know is whether it compels behavior or whether it is a pull, the way gravity is a pull. Present, but something a person can move against if they choose to." He thought about this before answering, which she noted and appreciated. He was not reaching for a reassuring answer. He was thinking about an honest one. "It is a pull," he said, "a strong one, but I have met people who chose to move against it, for various reasons. It did not destroy them. It is not a compulsion." He paused. "It is more like knowing that this person exists, that there is a connection, and then deciding what to do with that knowledge." "So you could choose not to be here?" "Yes," It would not have been easy, but it would have been a choice I could make. And instead, you chose to send scouts through 5 settlements for 3 weeks. Yes. She looked at him. Why, if you could have chosen not to? He met her gaze directly, and she had the impression, again, of a man doing something that required effort, not because it was painful, but because it was important to him that it be done right. Because I knew you existed, he said. Because for 3 weeks, I had the knowledge that there was a person in the world who had knelt beside me in the cold and worked for 4 hours, without any reason to accept that it was the right thing to do, and then walked away without expecting anything. And I could not— He stopped, started again. I could not simply know that and do nothing about it, not because the bond demanded it, because I did not want to. Seraphine was quiet for a moment. The river moved past them. A bird called somewhere in the trees. Question 2, she said. Your pack Ironmore. What would my position be if this were to become real? You would be my mate and Ironmore's alpha queen, he said. Those are not ceremonial titles. They carry actual authority within pack governance. You would have direct input into decisions affecting the territory, access to all pack resources, and my second in command, whose name is Oliver, and who is extremely capable, and who is also the person who has not forgiven me for going alone that day, would answer to you as much as to me in my absence. I have never governed anything, Seraphine said. I noticed you reorganized the Crest Hollow medical supply system when the winter illness came through last year, Seelan said. Mara told me. Apparently Elder Bram was about to attempt it himself, and you took it out of his hands and did it in a day and a half. Seraphine stared at him. Your wolves and Mara have been very busy. Oliver finds information gathering calming, Seelan said, with the same tone he had used when discussing Mara's efficiency, as though the world around him simply operated this way, and he had long since accepted it. Question 3, she said, looking back at her list. I am an albino omega in Crest Hollow. That combination has meant most of my life that I am treated as less significant than other members of the pack. I want to know, honestly, whether that would be different in Ironmore, not by decree, not because you told people to treat me differently, but actually different. He was quiet for a moment. I will not pretend that every Ironmore wolf will receive you perfectly on day 1, he said. There will be people who do not know what to make of you. There will be an adjustment period that will probably be uncomfortable in specific ways, that are different from how Crest Hollow has been uncomfortable. He paused, but I will tell you this. My pack does not function by following their alpha's instructions about who matters and who doesn't. They function by watching what I actually do, and what I would actually do, and what I intend to actually do, is treat you as the person who is equal to me in this partnership, not below me, not above me, to sequel. He looked at her. That is not a promise I can make perfect. It is a commitment I can make real. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at her list. Question 4, she said. I need to be able to go to the river. I need to be able to gather herbs, to treat injuries and illnesses, to continue doing the work I do. I am aware that an alpha queen of a major territory will have duties that compete with that. I want to know if there is room for both. Yes, he said, without hesitation. That was fast. I have had 3 weeks to think about what kind of arrangement would be honest, he said. I am not interested in a partner who has abandoned the things that make her who she is in order to perform a role that would not be a partnership, that would be acquiring an accessory. He paused. For what it is worth, Ironmore territory has 3 significant rivers and a healer network that has been understaffed for 2 years because we have not found the right person to lead it. Seraphine looked at her list. She had written 7 questions. She had asked 4. She looked at numbers 5 and 6 and 7, and she thought about what he had said, and she thought about the star thistle, and she thought about the way he had stood outside her gate for 10 days and not made it something she had to manage. She folded the paper. Those were all the important ones, she said. Are you sure? The other 3 are things I can figure out by experience, she said. They are not things I can answer from a conversation. She looked at the water. I need time. I know. Not 10 days more than that. But I want— She stopped. Found the right words. I want to figure this out in the real world, not through scouts and gate conversations. If I am going to understand whether this is something I am choosing or something that is happening to me, I need to be able to test that in actual conditions. He looked at her steadily. What would that look like? It would look like me taking time before I make any final decisions. It would look like honest conversations rather than political ones. It would look like me being able to say, I am not ready yet, on any given day, and that being respected without argument. Yes to all of that, he said. She looked at him. She looked at the way the morning light caught the gold in his eyes, and the particular careful attention he was giving to this moment, as though it mattered to him very much that it be done exactly right. I am not easy, she said. I know, he said. I am also not easy. I imagine we will inform each other of that regularly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, The yarrow patch is about a quarter-mile downstream from here. I usually check it on mornings this cold because the frost affects the flowering. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, should I come? She stood up from the rock and started walking downstream. I will not stop you, she said. He stood up and walked beside her. Neither of them filled the silence, because the silence did not need to be filled. The river moved alongside them, cold and constant. The frost began to lift off the grass as the sun rose higher. A heron stood on a rock in the middle of the current, absolutely still, watching something in the water. When they reached the yarrow patch, Seraphine crouched down and showed him how to tell the difference between yarrow and false yarrow by the way the stems branched. She did it because it was useful information and because she had always believed that a healer should teach rather than hoard. She did not think about the fact that she was teaching him until she was halfway through and noticed that he was paying complete and genuine attention, the way a person paid attention when they had decided that something mattered. He did not pretend to already know. He did not try to impress her. He just listened and looked where she pointed and asked one honest question about the root structure that told her he had actually been following everything she said. She answered the question. He nodded. They kept walking. 6 weeks later, Seraphine Ashvale left Crest Hollow on a clear morning in early December, with her herb satchel on one shoulder and her repaired cloak and a letter in her other hand. She stopped at Elder Bram's cottage and left the letter with his wife, who held it with both hands and looked at Seraphine with an expression that was complicated and genuine. You do not have to go, the woman said, not unkindly, the way people said things they feel they are supposed to say. I know, Seraphine said, and she did know. She had not been pushed or rushed or convinced. She had been given 6 weeks, and every question answered, and the star thistle for the chest remedy, and a walk along the yarrow patch in the frost. She had been given time, which was the only thing she had actually asked for. She walked through the settlement one last time, past the market stalls and the cold room and the outer storage shed and the eastern gate, and she thought about all the mornings she had walked this path in the opposite direction, coming home from the river with her herb basket and her ordinary quiet life and her particular brand of invisible existence, in a place that had never quite known where to put her. She thought about how she had stayed, for all of those years, out of the habit of staying, because leaving felt like admitting that what she had here was not enough, and admitting that had felt too much like giving Crest Hollow the satisfaction of having been right about her. She understood now that leaving had nothing to do with Crest Hollow at all. Seelan was waiting at the Ironmoor border, not at the edge of Crest Hollow territory, not at the gate, but at the actual Ironmoor boundary line, which was a 2-hour walk through the forest, and which she had walked herself, because she had wanted the 2 hours. He was alone. His wolves were further back, far enough to be out of earshot. He did not say anything when she reached him. He looked at her face, and she looked at his, and after a moment she said, I have one more question. Yes, he said. When I close a door in your face, she said, will you always give me the space to open it again? He held her gaze. Always, he said. She nodded. She started walking into Ironmoor territory. He walked beside her. The ceremony, when it came weeks later, was small. She wore river gray. There were pine boughs and no flowers, because she had chosen every detail herself. And flowers in December were an affectation she had no interest in. Oliver, Selin's second-in-command, stood through it with the precise expression of a man who had worried for a very long time and was only now beginning to think things might be all right. Ironmoor was larger than she had imagined. The rivers were different from the ashfen, wider in places, shallower in others, with different plants along the banks, and different light through the trees. She spent the first weeks learning the new landscape the way she had learned everything in her life, methodically, with attention, going back to the same places until they felt known. Salen learned the names of the herbs alongside her, badly at first, then less badly. She was patient about it. He was not a natural student, but he was a genuine one, which was the more important quality. On a morning in late February, when the frost was finally beginning to ease and the first early signs of the winter thaw were showing in the river margins, she found a patch of early flowering yarrow along the bank of the northern Ironmore River and crouched down to check the root structure. The ground was still cold under her hands. The water moved past beside her, different from the ashfen, but carrying the same kind of steady persistence, going where it was going, indifferent to the seasons. Salen crouched beside her. "The branching," he said, looking at the stems. "From the secondary growth point, not the main stalk." "Yes," she said. "Same as the ashfen variety?" "Slightly finer here. The soil is more acidic on this bank." She showed him the difference with 2 fingers, holding the stems side by side. He looked where she pointed. He asked the right question. She thought, for a moment, about an October morning, and a cold river, and a decision that had not felt like a decision at the time. Just the ordinary choice of a person who heard a broken sound beneath the sound of water and stayed because silence felt wrong, and because the one thing she had always known about herself, the one thing Crest Hollow had never managed to take from her, was that she did not walk away from something that needed help. That was who she was. It had always been who she was. And sometimes, she thought, kneeling in the frost, with her hands in the soil, and the river moving beside her, and a man learning the names of plants because they mattered to her, that is exactly enough. The frost began to lift off the grass as the sun rose higher. Somewhere upstream, a bird called once, clearly, and went quiet. The river kept moving. It always did.